If you clicked on this video, you've probably seen a lot of rig build videos or camera rigs in general, and there's a lot that people, myself included, add to their camera rigs that kind of aren't necessary. So I'm going to go through my latest general rig build for my Sony FX30 and explain all the parts and why some of them are beneficial and why some of them kind of aren't. Let's get to it. Now, the first thing that you're going to need for a video camera setup, at least when you're rigging up a mirrorless style camera like this. But if you're using a bigger camera with mounting points all over it, you're probably not going to need a cage because those cameras are designed to be rigged up by themselves. They obviously do make cages for even Alexas and stuff like that, but they're a little less necessary some of the time because those cameras just are built to be rigged. Whereas mirrorless hybrid cameras aren't necessarily, so you have to add a cage to make them riggable. The cage that I've got on here now is the SmallRig Hawklock FX3/FX30 cage with the handle extension. I made a whole video about this and the cage itself, but mainly the handle extension because it is a great addition to the FX3 or FX30 if you're going to use the top handle. But as I said, the biggest benefit to cages in general is to allow for you to mount other accessories to it. They've got 1/4-20s and 3/8 inch mounts usually all over them, NATO rails, cold shoes, anything that you would need to mount other accessories like all the stuff that I've got on here. They also will generally have multiple screw holes on the bottom to mount your tripod plates that often have 2 screws. Like this one has one 1/4-20 and one 3/8. That's kind of the way that a lot of tripod plates come, and I prefer that way, but you can't screw in 2 screws to the bottom of a camera that only has 1 hole. So that's another thing that cages help with. The benefit to having 2 screws in a tripod plate is it's not going to let any twisting happen between the plate and the body. So just a way more secure mounting system than 1 screw into the body of the camera itself. Cages on cameras like this can also just sort of make the grip more comfortable. It's pretty common with Sony that their grips are very short. So if you have average size hands or bigger, your pinky's sort of gonna fall off the bottom right here, but if you add a cage, it's gonna add a little bit of length, so that's not an issue. They also add a little bit of thickness here to round out the grip itself, so it's generally a little bit more comfortable. I prefer the grip on my Sony cameras with a cage versus without. And then I also add a strap onto the grip as well, which a cage allows you to do much more easily than without. Okay, the next thing we've got on here is the monitor. Right now I've got the Portkeys HS8. It is an 8-inch SDI and HDMI monitor. The biggest benefit to having a monitor is you can just see what you're shooting easier because the screen is usually bigger, brighter, and it has a lot of monitor features that most cameras don't have, like waveforms, false color, focus peaking, and even anamorphic support that a lot of cameras may not have. So if you're going to do any like anamorphic de-stretching, you're going to do that in the monitor rather than in camera. A monitor also helps with shooting stuff like this because I have a monitor on top of this camera because the LCD screen is just really small, and at this distance it's kind of hard to see what I'm actually looking at. So having just a bigger screen is really helpful. And then when it comes to actually holding the camera, obviously I mentioned the grip on the side, but handles are another really important piece to a camera rig. Now you could make a shoulder rig where you actually put on your shoulder, you have the hand grips and the camera is like on a pad on top of your shoulder. There's a bunch of different types of handles you can get. Like right now I've got a Condor Blue rosette grip here. Now they actually replaced these recently with like the newer, better versions. Oh, by the way, there's a link in the description to pretty much everything that I mentioned here. The SmallRig and Condor Blue ones are affiliate links, so if you are going to get any of that stuff, I would really appreciate it if you use the link. Anyway, these rosette handles have been replaced by the new better ones, but I've left the link for the better ones down there instead of this one. But I really like having the rosette handle, one, because it's just a nice straight round handle that is a bit easier to deal with than something like this. This is the SmallRig rotating left handle, which is pretty good, and it attaches via a NATO rail, which is right on the cage, but I generally just prefer the feel of a rosette handle like this. And then of course you have top handles with the FX3 and the FX30. You have the audio handle, which has that built-in audio module right here, and then it acts as a top handle as well. You can also just get top handles on their own. This is another one from SmallRig that attaches via a NATO rail. Another reason why you'd want a cage, because a lot of handles attach either by a NATO rail or by a RE locating pin 3/8 inch mount. So you're not going to have them on most cameras. So a cage or at least a top plate somehow is the way to go when it comes to attaching handles, because it's going to be a much stronger connection. But top handles also add a few sort of unique functions. One, you can just sort of carry it a lot easier if you're just walking around. It's easier to carry a camera like this by its top handle, almost like a suitcase. But then also when it comes to shooting like low angle shots, it's a lot easier to do that from the top than having both hands on the side or having one hand on the side. So top handles are very useful. Also, a lot of handles have mounting points all over them. The handle extension that I mentioned before for the FX3 and FX30 handle has a lot of mounting points to screw stuff in, or it even has a Hawk Lock and NATO rail on the top, so you can just slot stuff straight into that, and even like cold shoes. So a lot of handles, even this rosette handle has a 1/4 20 on the top. So handles also add more mounting points for other accessories if needed as well. I've got my monitor attached via a dual ball head onto the handle extension. So those three things, the cage, the handles, and the monitor, I would consider to be like the big three, or the most important, or the first things to get when you're rigging up a camera. But there's definitely a lot more that you can get that still serves a purpose. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is the power solution. Now this is the SmallRig and Caleb Pike VB212 V-mount battery, and it is absolutely massive. But the reason that I got it is because I have been using these VB99 Pros from SmallRig. Again, links in the description for both of these. These ones are great, but you know, being 99 watt hours, they'll last a few hours with this whole rig. But I actually had 2 shoots recently where in less than 4 hours, my camera died, or the V-mount itself died. The camera was fine. The V-mount itself ran out of battery in a couple hours. So I was just like, you know what? Let's get the 212, and this theoretically should last basically all day. With everything turned on and not recording, it says it can do 8 hours. So that's pretty solid. These batteries themselves and other batteries as well have a lot of in and out ports for power as well. This one has 2 DTAP ports, so you can plug in stuff like your monitors or a dummy battery into that. Then it also has on the top some USB and DC ports right there. And then this one actually has a nice little lock, so the flap opens and it stays there. But as you can see, I'm not using any of those ports. And why I'm doing that is because I have this on the Condor Blue V-mount Pro plate. This is a powered V-mount plate that I have everything plugged into, and then using the BP power system that V-mount batteries utilize, all the power goes through this plate, and then that is what sends the power out to all of the accessories or the camera itself. I've got the camera plugged in by USB, the follow focus motor on the other side here plugged in by USB, and the monitor plugged in by a DTAP to DC. The benefit of a plate like this, and I've made a whole video about this if you want to go check it out, but the benefit to this is, one, you can swap batteries. So if this battery did die after shooting for 8 hours and I still needed to keep shooting, I can put another battery straight on there. The downside to this is you can't just hot swap, because you can't just like keep everything powered. If you do take the battery off, everything is going to lose power. That is why you power the camera by USB-C and not a dummy battery, because that means the camera can still keep going. But the other benefit of a plate like this is the fact that it has a nice switch on here, so I can kill all the power to everything, so it's not draining the battery, but I don't have to unplug everything, because leaving cables like unplugged is just a little bit annoying. So if I can just kill the power through the switch rather than unplugging everything from the battery, I find that very helpful. Also, when it comes to V-mount plates, you can get non-powered ones. This is one from SmallRig, and that's like just to mount the V-mount itself. And then that's when you would plug all your devices into the battery directly rather than using a powered plate. That works great. I'm currently using a non-powered plate on this camera right here because I only have the one V-mount Pro, and it's fine. It just means that I unplug the USB-C port when I'm not using the camera, because I don't want it to be draining power all the time. Okay, next we have the 15mm rods that the V-mount Pro is attached to. These are 12-inch 15mm carbon fiber rods from SmallRig, and this is a pretty good length for a rig like this. I think it can maybe go a little bit shorter, but you can usually get them in a bunch of different lengths. And the main reason that you would have them is to mount maybe a power solution on the back, or to mount follow focus accessories like the Tilta Nucleus Nano 2 here. They are mounted there through the base plate. This is the Tilta dual Manfrotto and Arca Swiss base plate. So you can use either Manfrotto or Arca Swiss style quick release plates, or even the bottom of the cage, because most cages actually have an Arca Swiss rail on the bottom. So you can slide your cage straight into the base plate rather than screwing a plate on. The downside to that, and the reason that I generally don't do it, is because at least with the small rig cages on the Tilta base plate, it doesn't go quite to the middle, so the camera's just very slightly offset and the rods aren't directly under the lens. Not a big deal, but I like things to be, you know, nice. But what this base plate allows me to do is not only mount those rods there and I can adjust them forwards and backwards and all that, but it also means that I can take the camera out but leave everything that's attached to the rods. So let's say I had my whole power system attached to the rods, all I do is unplug stuff and I can just slide the camera out of that base plate and use it with just what's attached to the camera itself. So that means you don't have to fully de-rig everything if you just want to take the camera out and use it on its own. With the rods, I also have the handle that I mentioned before, the rosette handle attached to those rods directly. I have the dual rosette rod adapter from Condor Blue that comes in that kit with the handles. And one of the good things about having your handles attached to the rods is you can actually slide them forward and backwards based on how the whole camera is going to balance. Right now with this big battery, I kind of want them as far back as possible so it's not going to be front heavy when I'm grabbing onto those handles. Whereas if I didn't have this big battery, if I had a really small one or no battery at all, then maybe I'd want to move them further forward to shift the balance point a little bit further back because I'm holding it further forward. And last thing with the base plate, generally they're easier to attach tripod plates to than cameras themselves, or like I mentioned before with cages. Cages really help, but base plates are generally easier than cages because they have a way more options for those mounting points. Speaking of tripods, this isn't necessarily to do with the rig itself, but this is the small rig Tribex. If you saw my video on it, then you know all about it. If you saw my video on it and wanted to buy one but couldn't because orders weren't open, they actually are at the moment, so there will be a link in the description if you do want to go get this, because they actually like reopened orders after I made that video. So just if you were interested, you can go check it out. But I don't know if a tripod is something that I would consider part of the camera rig, so that's why I'm not really talking about it in this video. Okay, now getting into the things that they definitely serve a purpose, but maybe they aren't necessary. And we're gonna start with the matte box. This is the Tilta Mirage matte box. And I don't know if this is controversial because I feel like a lot of people have very similar opinion that matte boxes are a great way to charge your clients more because it looks way more professional. And I don't think anyone would really disagree that a matte box looks more professional than just a lens on its own. But matte boxes actually do serve a purpose. You just may not need one. The two primary reasons to have a matte box is one, to block out flares from lights that are coming on sort of those wider angles. So you'll have the like hood on the outside here, and then usually you'll have flags, potentially multiple flags, to block out that extra light. And then the other, and probably the most important reason to have a matte box, is to use multiple filters at a time. This Mirage matte box from Tilta has this VND that slides straight into there. There's a 95mm filter. You can get different 95mm filters, and it locks in there. And then you could put another 4x5 filter on the front here. So then if you wanted to have like a mist and ND, or instead of the round VND, you have another filter and then you want to put another filter on top. Or you can mod this in a way where you can stack multiple 4x5 filters or multiple 95mm filters. So if you're going to be using like hard stop NDs, like 1 or 2 stop ones, rather than a variable ND, that's probably when you'll want to do that, because then you can stack the NDs to make it the correct amount rather than just turning the wheel. But with a system like this, I could just as easily do the same thing with a system like this with just a screw-on ND here. This is a 1 to 5 stop VND from Nisi. I could chuck a 4 stop on top of as well to make it a 1 to 9, which is what this one is. And I could also stack a mist filter on top of that if I wanted to. So while yes, there are absolutely reasons to have a matte box, a lot of people buy matte boxes to put on their camera because it looks cool. And a lot of matte boxes as well are kind of pointless. as an example, I have the Polar Pro Recon matte box, which, yes, technically it does one of the purposes of a matte box. It blocks out flares because it has that top flag. And you can stack a filter on top of the VND that comes built in, but you also don't need the matte box for that. You can just stack that straight onto the filter itself. So the matte box is almost pointless. And the reason that I got that matte box rather than just a regular like Peter McKinnon VND from Polar Pro is because I wanted a matte box, partially because it looked cool. And I'm not gonna say that's not a reason to get something, but it kind of doesn't really serve a purpose. So don't try and claim that it is super helpful if it isn't. You just got it because you wanted it, which is totally fair. But yeah, unless you're stacking filters, you probably don't need a matte box. So as I mentioned before, I have the Tilta Nucleus Nano 2 follow focus system. I have the focus motor attached to the focus ring on this Nisi Athena 40mm, and using the hand wheel here, I can adjust focus. This is going to be useful for someone who has a first AC. Like if I had somebody else pulling focus for me while I'm operating, then that can be very helpful, having a wireless system. You can get non-wireless ones, so if you want to pull focus by hand while you're operating the camera, then you can do that as well. You can also use these systems attached directly to it. So I actually have this little NATO to 15mm rod attachment, so I can slide that right onto there and then attach the hand wheel straight to that. So I can basically treat it like it's a non-wireless one, but then I can take it off whenever needed if someone else was gonna pull focus for me. Or if I was shooting a video like this with a manual lens and I wanted to pull focus from over here. But some form of follow focus system is basically a necessity when it comes to manual lenses. Now you can just pull focus on a manual lens with the barrel itself, but generally you'd want to use a follow focus system. Okay, another thing I have on here is this microphone. This is the Rode NTG1. It is an XLR microphone that is plugged into the XLR port of the audio handle here on the FX30. Some cameras like the FX3 and FX30 have the audio handle. Bigger cameras like the FX6 also has the XLR handle, but then if you go up to like a Burana or FX9 or even like Canon C70, they'll have XLR or mini XLR ports on the body itself, so you can use XLR mics straight on that camera. Most cameras like this though, mirrorless hybrid cameras sort of thing, they will have a 3.5mm jack just on the IO right here. A lot of other cameras also have a 3.5mm jack, so you would use a microphone more like this. This is the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus, and it just has a regular TRS connector there that'll just go straight into the microphone. You could also use a wireless system like I'm using now, using the Rode Wireless Pro with a lav here. But basically the type of mic that you use is determined by the type of job you're doing. Your two most common would be a shotgun directly on the camera like this, or a wireless lav system like I'm using now. And another thing that I have on this rig in particular is some cable management. Now, cable management is not necessary. You could build a rig and use it without managing cables that well, but it can be very helpful, and there's little things that can make that a lot easier. I have some Condor Blue Mondo ties. I actually have a couple on these handles as well, so if I do use these handles, I can put cables straight through them. And I have one right here on top of the V-Mount Pro, which just has my USB-C cable that's plugged in at the top of the plate. So I run that through the Mondo tie so the cable isn't sticking like up too much out of the way and in the way of the V-mount or something like that. So just having your cables neatly tucked away and not in your way is definitely better than just having them loose all over the place. You don't necessarily need things like the Mondo ties. I know Small Rig has like little clips, and most companies probably have some sort of clip to hold in cables. But you can even do stuff like wrapping it around, like right here, I've wrapped it around the 15mm rod. Done the same with this cable. If the cable is a bit too long, you can just wrap it around things. There are coiled cables, but I generally try to avoid coiled cables now because it's just like, this is so much extra cable that I don't need. If this cable was basically just as long but not coiled, it would be better for the most part. But when it comes to cables, what I would suggest is to get cables that are just a little bit longer than you actually need them to be, so it allows some movement and some flexibility. Like for example, this SDI cable here, this is, I think it's 8-inch SDI cable, and I've just got it sort of looped around once because it's going directly from the monitor straight into the transmitter that is right next to it, so it doesn't need to be long, whereas I have a 12G SDI cable in the drawer behind me that is way longer. So if I used that, there would be a lot more cable to manage. And another example would probably be the XLR cable that I've got right here. You probably can't even see it because it's the perfect length. I talked about this in my video about the SmallRig extension for the audio handle on the FX3, FX30. But this is just a little right angle cable that is plugged in the back of the mic, comes around the back actually, so you can't see it there. And then I just plug it in straight into the XLR port on the audio handle. But in general, with cable management, just keep them neat and tidy so they don't get caught on things or get in your way. And that's pretty much all you can do. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about that I actually have on this rig that I just mentioned is the wireless transmitter for video. This is the HoloLens Pyro S. I have it mounted straight to the HS8 because one of the good things about the HS8 and some monitors is it has like a built-in NPF dummy battery, so you can just mount your transmitter or any other accessory straight to the monitor itself, and that powers it and mounts it, so you don't have to worry about mounting it somewhere else using a Magicom or something like that. And you also don't need another cable or battery. You can just power it straight off the batteries in the monitor or via the DC cable that I've got it plugged into right now, going straight into the V-mount plate. Generally, you would use this on a set where you have like a larger crew, so you can have somebody pulling focus for you, or have the director or the client watching from somewhere so they're not peeking over your shoulder when you're shooting. Or if you have the camera in a way that you can't really see the monitor very well, having a wireless feed so then you can just watch it on a different monitor can be a lot easier than trying to look at a weird angle or just set it up and hope. And now I don't have this on this rig, but the other thing that I sort of think is kind of important on a lot of rigs is timecode. And you get things like the Deity TC1, which is just a little timecode generator box that you could mount somewhere on your rig, and then you just plug that into your camera to sync it with all your other cameras or audio devices. You could also jam sync things, so you don't necessarily need a bunch of those. You could just, you know, get like a timecode slate or something like that. I don't have any timecode stuff right now, apart from the Rode Wireless Pro, which is arguably kind of timecode, but kind of not. But that's another thing that you would probably have on your rig if you are always doing multicam stuff or recording audio separately and you want to make the syncing process a lot easier by just using timecode. But yeah, that's all the elements of this rig, I guess. Let me know if you have any questions or thoughts about anything I mentioned. Like I said, there's links in the description to a lot of this stuff. Some of those are affiliate links, some of them aren't. If you use the affiliate links, I'd greatly appreciate that. But yeah, let me know what you think. Maybe go watch another video on, you know, the FX30 top handle extension from SmallRig, or the V-mount Pro maybe from Condor Blue. I might make a video about the VB212 at some point as well. I don't know. Anyway, do all the other things. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye.